Okay, welcome back, members, to this Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. And we move to item 6, and that's the Capital Strategy 2024-25. I'll now ask Caris Lord, the Chief Officer of Finance, Performance and Change, to briefly introduce the report. Caris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present to this committee the draft capital strategy for the period 2024-2025 through to 2033-2034. Committee is asked to provide any comments for consideration in the finalisation of this strategy for presentation to Cabinet and Council in February. So the control of capital expenditure and the investments that we make are regulated by legislation. The regulations provide the framework for accounting practices to be followed and also contain detailed provisions for the capital finance and accounting controls, including the rules on the use of capital receipts and what is to be treated as capital expenditure. Local authorities are required to determine a capital strategy which must be approved by full council, which demonstrates that the council takes capital expenditure and investment decisions in line with service objectives and properly takes account of stewardship, value for money, prudence, sustainability and affordability when making these decisions. The Code also states that a council cannot borrow to invest primarily for financial return. The proposed capital strategy for the period I outline is attached for you at Appendix A of this afternoon's report. The financial information included in the draft strategy will be updated when the council's budgets are finalised. Any comment from this committee will be considered when the strategy is finalised for Cabinet to consider at its meeting on the 20th of February and for Council to approve on the 28th of February. So the capital strategy is a policy framework document that sets out the principles to be used to guide the allocation of capital investments across all of the council services and informs decisions on capital spending priorities within the council's 10-year capital programme. It also reports on the delivery, affordability and risks associated with this strategy. The strategy sets out the council's approach to asset management planning, risk, governance and decision making, capital investment over the coming 10 years, funding of the strategy, managing our borrowing requirements and the affordability of the programme. So the document outlines for you how we manage the risk within the capital programme. It's expected that a feasibility study is completed to determine whether or not a scheme can be delivered before the council invests time and money into a project. To be included in the capital programme, the council needs to understand how successful the project will be, what will be delivered, at what cost, how it will be funded, and what potential risks may be inherent within that project. The strategy also outlines for you the pressures currently being faced by the council within the capital programme, and these include the increased price of materials as a result of inflation, with some costs coming in at 25% higher than previously estimated. Problems with supply chain difficulties leading to higher prices, but also delays in schemes being completed. The recruitment challenges both within the council and within the companies we contract with, which is resulting in higher wages and overall contract costs. And also some of the additional requirements on schemes to achieve Welsh Government's net zero commitments, which will lead to changes on the way assets are designed and managed, which may result in increased costs. You will be aware that there is a monitoring process in place with regards to the capital programme, which reports on variances in expenditure and slippage on individual schemes and seeks explanations from project managers to report back to inform future planning decisions. And also we are required to report capital programmes to yourself in Cabinet and in Council on a quarterly basis, which include the details of any variance between projects as well as projections of likely year-end spend. So the 10-year rolling programme has been initially set for 24-25 with an indicative allocation for the 9 years thereafter. The strategy outlines how it's proposed to fund the strategy and also the borrowing requirement to enable this to happen. And performance indicators included within the strategy will be reported back to Cabinet and Council on a quarterly basis. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to take you to section 9 of the report and the recommendations, which are that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the draft capital strategy, including the prudential indicators, and provide any comments for consideration in the finalisation of this strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caris. And I've got two comments on page 84 of the report, one from Councillor Amanda Williams, I believe, and then Councillor Simon Griffiths. Oh, there's a more general point, though, isn't it, Councillor Williams? Was it a more general point you had, or? Yeah, let's take the more general point then first, and then we'll go to Councillor Griffiths.
Sorry, it was just my point was I was looking through all of this, and we've had a number of issues crop up during this financial year, including the Bridgend market closure. So I wondered, obviously this is going to be going to council, will we be having a line in that budget that goes to council in the capital element of it for anything that we're going to pay out over the next year or two with regards to the market, please? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Caris?
Thank you for that question, and that's a good example, isn't it, of how things move on and can move on quite quickly. What I think the issue for the capital programme will be if we are aware of any costs associated with works that may be done on that building. At the current time, we don't have those costs, and therefore we're not able to factor them into the programme. We have in fact made a comment in our statement of accounts actually around the market, but again just to say that it's a future liability, but one that at the moment we can't actually quantify. So it would actually come into the capital programme once we know what the costs are, how we're going to fund them, how much work we're going to do, and at that point it would then come into the programme. I suppose there's a general point though about having maybe a line in this strategy about being aware of possible future liabilities and how the council will deal with them when they become known in more detail. Maybe there is a line that we could put in the strategy around that, if that would that answer your question, Councillor Williams?
Thanks. Councillor Williams?
Yes, thanks, because, I mean, that's just the market. That's one I know about. There might be other schemes as well that you don't have costs to. And when we're talking about this much money and we're looking at what reserves we've got for our capital projects, it'll give us an understanding of the potentials, risks we've got and the money we have to find for these capital projects too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Caris has given a commitment to that. Bring Councillor Griffiths first. I've promised him to come in, and then I'll bring in Councillor Penhouse-Thomas. You're on mute, Councillor Griffiths.
Not very good at remembering today. So my comments are really around the principles and what we can learn from what we've gone through this year in terms of making sure that our capital strategy is actually fit for purpose in a strenuous environment that we're actually running in at the moment. It actually partly refers to the previous comment, which is that obviously any capital investment may have an operational impact in the medium to long term. And what I don't see in the principles at the moment is any specific statement about consideration of operational cost impacts of capital investments. So I just wonder whether that's something that we could put in here. And the second point that I'd like to ask is around capital investment to save. So we do have a principle in there which talks about, I think it's the first point of principle 3, where we can promote capital investment to support saving outcomes for saving, and I just wonder how much more aggressive we can be around that principle in the current situation, and whether that's something that we should really actively push. So the first question was really about operational costs, and the second one, which is how more aggressive can we be on an invest to save approach.
I know that Councillor Penhouse-Thomas has got supplementary to that, so Caris, you can take them both together then, so I'll bring him now.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I think Councillor Griffiths is spot on with this first question. So my question was going to be to the two people whose headshots appear on the opening pages of the report, if they're actually still with us, but if not, Caris. How confident are we that the draft capital strategy, which in itself is a good starter for town, how confident are we that it takes account of the bleak financial picture that we find ourselves in? I'd like to think that there is a growing sense of realism amongst members, elected members, and hopefully over time, members of the public, that the wide-reaching ambition of the capital programme is going to come under some real strain, not just this year, but in the coming 10 years for the lifetime of this strategy. And we're going to have some really challenging and difficult conversations about what we think we can achieve based on what's in it at the moment. So yeah, is there confidence then that it accurately takes account of the acute financial pressures that we're under, which are like never before this year? Thanks, Chair.
And Caris, I'm the leader here, so I can bring in the leader first and then Caris.
Chair, can I first of all address the first question about from Councillor Griffiths about revenue costs and savings. So in the governance and decision making section of the report on prioritisation, evaluation and skills, then as part of the expression of interest for capital projects, there has to be an indication of potential revenue savings. And then in terms of ranking schemes, is the service able to meet any additional costs within existing budgets? So that is something that is very much part of that decision-making process. We can potentially look to strengthen that. I think Councillor Pennant-Thomas is absolutely right. We will have to consider our capital programme going forward. There are plans, for example, to take the school modernisation programme to Review and Scrutiny Committee meeting to look at the detail of that programme. And I think it would be wise to together programmes to overrule scrutiny, because we're going to have to make some decisions around the capital programme going forward for the well-documented reasons of austerity and financial pressures that we face. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Caris?
Yes, thank you very much for that. The leader has kind of said what I was going to say, which is that I think that we will be far more robust when these feasibility studies come in for new schemes. We'll be far more robust about, first of all, challenging the costs that are in there and whether they do reflect the current climate that scheme is going to be delivered in, but also on what are the revenue consequences of doing that scheme. So does it result in new revenue costs, in which case, how are we going to fund those? Or is it, as you've suggested, maybe an invest to save, and therefore it can have a positive impact on our revenue account? And I think we will certainly be more robust on that when new schemes come forward. The other area that you talked about was invest to save, and whether or not we can be more robust on that. I think we've had some examples already mentioned in the meeting this morning. So, for example, there's capital spend now for housing and homelessness at a level that we haven't had before, and also we've had extra money from Welsh Government at over £3 million to help us with that, and that is about bringing properties back into use, bringing voids back into use, purchasing buildings that are otherwise not being in use. And actually, the reason for that capital spend is because it will do two things. It will positively impact on our revenue account, and it will be a better outcome for those people who are in need of those services. And the other one, which the Deputy Leader mentioned early on, is the Housing with Care Fund, where we can access money actually to develop capital monies to develop services for social care in the area, which again will have a very positive impact on our revenue account. So I think we're doing a lot more now to try to access those funds, many of them external, because they will have that positive impact on our revenue account.
Thank you very much, Caris. Councillor Griffiths, Councillor Pennant-Thomas, you content?
Yeah, just to support the leader's comments there, I think we may want to add a principle in there about the consideration of the impact on revenue budgets in the future, to make sure that it's actually one of our principles that we always take into account.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant-Thomas?
Yeah, I'm content with what the leader has said. I'm I don't want us to be pessimistic. I want us just to be very realistic about what we can achieve. And the leader and I and Councillor Williams have discussed this in group leaders recently. The capital programme is the good stuff. It's the stuff that we want to deliver. It's the ambition. But so long as we have a sense of realism around it, I think that's really important. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Now we move to page 86, I believe, and that's Councillor Griffiths again.
Yeah, so this was on a similar topic actually, and I was just wondering what stage are we at with a review of our current capital assets to see how many of them could potentially be disposed to release some income in the short term.
Thank you. Caris, can you answer that one?
Yes, I mean, that is an ongoing exercise that we do actually to review our assets, and that is ongoing. In fact, we've stepped it up a bit in relation to housing, for instance, looking at what we've got to see whether or not it's suitable for us to do some work on with regards to addressing our homelessness issues. So it is an ongoing issue. We will seek to dispose of assets if we have no future use for them. Obviously, because that would help us by way of a capital receipt. But before we do that, we will make sure that that asset is, we cannot use it in some way within the council before we would dispose of it.
Thank you very much, Caris. Councillor Griffiths, you contend?
Yeah, just one specific thing comes to mind. I know this has been discussed in other scrutiny, which is around Porthcawl Harbour and our ownership of that. And I wonder whether that's an asset that could possibly be run just as well or even better in private hands.
Thank you. Any comments at all, Caris, Leader? Maybe it's a political choice.
We're prepared to consider all options, provided it offers a good value to the taxpayer in that sense of whether there would be interest and how much they would be prepared to pay. I think we have to remember that it's a listed structure, the harbour marina, so there are additional costs that arise from that. We do know that there are other such facilities operated obviously by commercial operators, so that is certainly something we'd be prepared to consider.
Thank you very much for that. We now move to Councillor Tim Thomas on page 90.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, my question relates to, it might be a fairly simple question, but I may have some supplementaries depending on the answer. And it's just to help me understand this a little bit, and it relates to commercial activities. It states on page 90 that investment properties, and this is chiefly around the science park. In total, there's been an investment of 5.845 million, and that's as of March the 31st, 2023. I'm just wondering, when did that investment period start? Because it doesn't say when the investment started, and says as of the particular date. If I can have some clarity on that.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Caris?
I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head, Chair. I don't know. I've got some colleagues on the call. I don't know. Yeah, Deb's put her hand up. Maybe she can help with that one.
Thanks very much. Deborah?
Thank you, Chair. For the recording, Deborah Exton, Deputy Head of Finance. I don't have the exact dates to hand. I'm not sure if Nigel has them available, but I do know that a lot of these, if not all of these, date back to pre-Bridgend days. So through Glamorgan County Council, and that council actually, had units on the Science Park and the Innovation Centre. So I think a lot of these are inherited from Glamorgan County Council days, but we can get that information to you if you require that.
Might be good.
Yeah, that's been recorded, Councillor Thomas, and we'll make sure that information is circulated to committee members.
Just on that, Chair, I mean, I think that eases my mind then really on the rate of return, the rate of return on the investment, which is 558k per annum. I mean, I'm assuming then the income is well in advance of the investment, but I suspect that I'm not an expert on SIPFA statistics, if that's how you pronounce it, but I'm just wondering, is there, is this part of the SIPFA statistics? And if it is, how do we relate to other local authorities in terms of commercial investments and the rate of return we get in our investments?
Thank you very much. Caris?
I can check for you whether there are SIPFA returns in relation to this, but one of the reasons for the change in the code is due to SIPFA's concern, I suppose, about the level of these types of investments that councils have been making very recently, and many of them on a fairly speculative basis. And now that's why some of these local authorities, which have been mentioned before when we brought Treasury management reports to you, are now in difficulties because they've invested in that type of property and the returns haven't been as high as they'd anticipated. So from a professional point of view, SIPFA is very adverse to us using our monies in that line now, as is outlined in the report. In fact, we cannot invest purely for financial gain any longer. But if there are those statistics around, Councillor Thomas, then we will find them for you and send you the information.
Marvellous, thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Caris. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor David?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's important to recognise that decisions around the acquisition and investment and creation of these properties would have been primarily driven by social and economic reasons, so that we have that industrial and commercial space in the county borough. They wouldn't have been driven for commercial reasons, though of course they do generate commercial income. We are currently looking, for example, at an expansion of units in Village Farm Industrial Estate in Pyle, but that is because we're able to access grant funding from UK government, so that helps with obviously the costs, and then we would earn an income from that. It would be fully grant funded, but the purpose of that is to provide accommodation for new and starter businesses in the county borough. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Williams, please.
Thank you very much. I've got a question on the top of page 92. Now, I was pleased to see that during 2023, the council established a capital programme board, because I think that's something that was recommended in council. But I just wondered, it says it's governance and decision making. I just wondered, we've got in here what it consists of, but if we could have a little bit more information on how they provide that governance and decision making, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. And I understand you had a similar question, Councillor Hughes, didn't you?
Yeah, just to follow that up, Chair, I think, yes, it's only just been set up. I think what we do need to include in the strategy is a review process, because in terms of the frequency of the meetings, is the membership broad enough? And to look ahead to some of the big challenges, because we've got the post-call Grand Pavilion scheme coming up, which in cost terms is actually twice the size of my Steg Town Hall. So I think it is important in setting up a body like this that we review it regularly enough and make sure that it does fulfill its terms of reference. If I could also, Chair, just jump in as well with the reference to the Grand Pavilion. I've checked the whole strategy, and there isn't any mention of my Steg Town Hall, even though the work is still underway there, and the probability is that there will still be some capital expenditure needed beyond April 2024. I just wonder, Chair, if that's been picked up and allowed for in the strategy. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams and Councillor Hughes. Caris?
Thank you for those questions. As you rightly said, Councillor Hughes, the the Capital Programme Board has only recently been established. So I think your suggestion that actually we look at a review of that as what maybe once it's been meeting for a year, for us to review, as you said, the terms of reference, whether or not they need to be changed, and whether or not there are things that that board should or should not be discussing. So I'm quite happy to take that forward as an action within the strategy. I think with regards to the governance process, all decisions with regards to the capital programme come through Cabinet and then through Council. And this programme board is not changing those governance. So there won't be anything, any decisions made by that board. But it is a method of us picking up on any issues in individual schemes early to try and ensure that we can take whatever remedial action is required. And if it is required and it does need a change to anything, it would still have to come through Cabinet and then through to full Council before any decisions would be made in relation to that particular scheme. And I think, picking up on your point, it is about us learning the lessons as well. So as you say, we're about to embark on the scheme at Porthcawl Pavilion, and it is important that we harness the lessons that we've learned from the My Stake Town Hall scheme. And feed that into our management and oversight of the pavilion in Porthcawl, because, as you rightly say, actually the cost of that is twice the sum of the My Stake Town Hall one. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Hughes, are you content with that reply?
Yeah, just to come back, the two aren't mutually exclusive, are they? Because the expertise that we've got invested in My Stake Town Hall will be transferred into Porthcawl Grand Pavilion, and so we ought to look at those in total. Regarding the capital expenditure on My Stake Town Hall, could Carys comment on any expenditure that will run into the next financial year?
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Carys?
Yeah, I don't think we're clear yet what expenditure will slip into next year in relation to My Stake Town Hall. As soon as that's clarified, obviously we will include it in the reports that come through, and members will be made fully aware of that if that happens.
Yeah, I think you've said that the capital programme will be subject to constant scrutiny and amendment, so thank you for that, Carys. With regards to your question on page 96, Councillor Hughes, I assume that's been dealt with now as a result of that question, yeah. So the only other question that I've got is page 104, and that is from Councillor Tim Thomas on the mutual investment model, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's a bit of a complicated one, so trying to gather my thoughts really. But so mutual investment model, from reading the report, my understanding that is the investment model used for increasing Welsh and English provision in Bridgend West. And my basic understanding of the mutual investment model is that it is a preferable model than PFI, because we won't get ripped off for light bulbs and toilet rolls and the like. But what the report doesn't give any indication on is the level of fee that the developer is commanding for these infrastructure for these capital projects, and how long what the term of the fee is. And really, well, we might be able to establish this from that understanding, but what is the value added in terms of the developer's initial investment from our expenditure into this investment? So I wonder if perhaps that's one for Carys, I think, Chair, but I may have another question on the back of that.
Okay, thank you. Carys?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Thomas. As you know, we have a large schools development programme in Bridgend, which is funded with support from Welsh Government, and we can get that support in one of two ways. They either give us an allocation towards it, which is what our current schemes have, and we have to match fund a certain degree of that. So we have to have capital finance available to meet that. Or you can take this route that you're talking about, the mutual investment model, And what that doesn't require so much from us is in setting it up, it's about we then pay a cost towards the cost of that for over a period of time. Now, and often authorities will go down that route where we don't have the level of capital funding necessary to be able to use the previous route that I outlined for you. So if the option has been taken to use that particular model for the development of those schools, as you've said, and they're outlined in the report there for you. What I don't know, and I don't know whether any of my colleagues on the call know the term over which we would be paying that money, or indeed if we know at the current point exactly what those revenue costs would be. I can see Deb's just put her hand up.
Thanks, Caris. Deborah?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, in terms of the contract period, that would be 25 years. So we would be paying a revenue contribution over 25 years. The mutual investment model is made up of Welsh Government funding, and they have an intervention rate of 81% for this. So 81% of our annual revenue will obviously come from Welsh Government, and then the council will pay the remaining 19%. And in the budget papers, the MTFS papers, if you look at the budget pressures for future years, we have got a line in the budget pressures, just indicative at the moment, as to what that revenue cost is likely to be on an annual basis. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's around 800,000 a year. And that's the obviously covers the cost of the build of the school, plus fixtures and fittings initially, and then the ongoing maintenance of that school over that 25-year period. So all the costs associated with the contractor are included within that annual fee that we pay. I don't know if there's anything else you need information on, or if that's sufficient.
That's really good. Thank you, Deborah. The fee is pretty fundamental to help us understand if this is value for money. So perhaps at a later date, if Caris or Deborah could get that fee. I was going to ask perhaps the Cabinet Member for Resources this question, but I think you've half answered it already. And I was going to ask why this investment model was favoured over more traditional models such as the Public Works Loan Board. But I'm assuming this has been favoured because of the collaborative approach with the Welsh Government, whereby they support a bit of the capital investment. Is that fair in my understanding?
Thanks, Councillor Thomas. The leader would like to come in first.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So on the basis of that partnership with Welsh Government, so it is their preferred model. Welsh Government have recognised that they don't have enough capital to commit upfront to cover all the costs of the 21st Century School Modernisation Programme. And this does represent very good value for us, because for every £19 we put it in, we'll be getting £81 back from Welsh Government. The scheme is negotiated on an all Wales basis, so there's fees are part of that, and there was an exercise through which that partner was procured, and part of that exercise was about obviously the fee level, as well as other factors like experience and quality that you would expect in such an exercise. And we have had reports to Cabinet on it, but we can certainly get that additional detail for Councillor Thomas. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Are you content, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, my initial thoughts on mutual investment funds weren't that positive, but I'm fairly reassured actually with the comments pending clarification on the fee.
Okay, thank you. We'll get that information to you, and Rachel has recorded that. Councillor Walter, apologies if I missed you earlier.
That's all right, Chair. I didn't get my hand up quick enough. I'd like, with your indulgence, to go back to page 96, table 2, where it sets out that the community's budget for capital expenditure for the forthcoming financial year is just shy of £41 million. I might be barking up the wrong tree here, in which case I'll go and get my coat. But we've heard continuously through GREP, through SOC 3, through COSC, about how under-resourced communities is they've got no staff to do things and are bearing disproportionate cuts going into next year. And I'm sure if John was still there, he'd say, Councillor Spanswick, have done since for the last 10 years. And examples of that are things like the 20-mile-an-hour rollout scheme took staff away from, shall we say, core highways duties, the blue badge exercise. So my questions really are around how are £41 million worth of projects going to be delivered against a backdrop where, and I think the director's own words were, she hasn't got staff to do things. Where is the funding to manage these projects? And can we get any reassurance that in managing these projects, people won't be taken off, shall we say, business as usual duties, which will lead to further deterioration in the kind of issues we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Walter. Caris, can you intervene on that?
Yes, I can comment on that. Thank you, Councillor Walter, for the question. I think it's a very valid one because we've experienced issues in the current year, haven't we, around exactly some of the issues that you're raising, really. So, and again, that's some of the learning that we need to take forward, isn't it, as we were discussing under the last question, really. Some of these, some of that spend is, I mean, you know, about half of it relates to Porth Call, for instance, which are coming in with significant grant funding attached to them. We are able to use some of that grant funding to buy in the capacity we need to do some of the project management around that. And I know that the service for that one in particular is already looking at that and making sure that we're bringing in the capacity that we need to ensure that that one is managed well. And there are other ones in there, such as the Shared Prosperity Fund, where we do have staff who are particularly bespoke looking at that and managing that. So I know that it's something, sorry the director isn't here to answer these questions, but it is something that they're very mindful of, making sure that the project management capacity they've got is being used to deliver on these large schemes. What I can't answer for is things that may happen during the year that will impact on their ability to do that. But certainly I know the director is very mindful of the resource that's needed to manage this programme effectively.
Thanks, Chair. If I may just carry on just briefly, I know we've got time issues, and that is reassuring, but I do recall, I'm fairly sure, during a SOC3 meeting in the last 12 months or so, that actually securing some of the expertise needed, even if we can buy it in because the grant funding includes monies towards such activities, buying them in has been very difficult. We've heard time and again that attracting the right qualified people for expertise within communities has been almost impossible. So I do have a concern that there might be a moving across of people from business as usual to these types of £41 million worth of projects, and I just wanted to share that concern. Thanks for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walter. That's been noted, and the capital programme which accompanies this capital strategy will be coming before us in due course, no doubt, so we can pick up some of those concerns and other items relating to the capital programme at the appropriate time. Unless there are any other interventions on this particular item, we will thank the invitees after 5 hours, and you may leave the meeting so that we can discuss our conclusions and recommendations from the meeting. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions today. Okay, members, we're reaching the end of the marathon meeting, and we now discuss item 7, and that's our conclusions and recommendations. I hope Rachel has managed to capture what's been the best part of 5 hours of meeting, and I'll hand over to her to make some opening remarks before we add some supplementary remarks of our own. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So if I take members back to the first item, which although wasn't on the agenda as the first item, it was the corporate plan delivery plan review for 24-25. I have a few requests for information and some comments and possible recommendations. There was some discussion, there was a request for information in terms of the communication peer review report. I think that was Councillor Amanda Williams. There was comments around I've got previous scrutiny PIs. Sorry, I know what that's about. Trying to read my own notes. So in relation to the PIs that were suggested previously by Scrutiny, there was some consideration over that and whether they should be put forward. I think, as the Chair highlighted, that there is some consideration needed in March, acknowledging the fact that given the budget proposals going forward, if they do go forward as they stand, then there will be a need to reduce some of the PIs that are going forward as part of the corporate plan. So I think really that was just a start of that conversation. So I think the recommendation that was asked for was to keep the previous scrutiny PIs, but revisit them in March, acknowledging that, as I've said. Are members happy with that going forward? Yeah. Yep. There was also a request then that the Democratic Services Committee consider about the running of meetings and whether they can visit that as part of their remit and to see whether things can be run a bit more efficiently, looking at number of meetings and the running of meetings, etc. So I can take that up with the committee. They're meeting next week, so I'll put it on their forward work programme if they agree to it. Okay. Were there any other comments in relation to the corporate plan the members wish to make, please?
I'd just like to echo your thoughts, Rachel. Councillor Griffiths said we should keep our original recommendations for PIs on the agenda for now when heads of service and Cabinet and Corporate Management Board have concluded their discussions, and when we know more about the final budget settlement and have approved our MTFS going forward, we can revisit them. I listed a number of headline PIs which I think ought to be considered by the Council as a priority going forward, but we can, as you say, we can pick it up again in March.
If you send those, Chair, I can include those in the overall comments and recommendations, and then we can send that through. In relation to the MTFS 2024-25 to 27-28, so if I can just start. So if I'm going to go section by section in terms of the way that the meeting was run. So in terms of BREP recommendations, were there any comments in relation to strengthening, amending any of the BREP recommendations made? Noting that some of those obviously have been picked up by the various committees in there, and I'm going to come back to one of those later in the discussion as well on this. But was there anything in relation to BREP recommendations that members wish to make any comments or recommendations, further recommendations on, please?
From my perspective, I think they're picked up by the various scrutiny committees, but has anyone spotted anything which they'd like to raise at this stage from the BREP process? These are the recommendations on the budget and MTFS rather than the process itself. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, just my question when I said about the budget book, and I have picked this up with Caris, who did agree with me directly that this should be shared with us members, not just simply put online, because if we had that, as soon as it's complete for this financial year, then it gives us that information that we've been asking for through the BREP process. We'll have that there, so it should be circulated. So the recommendation would be that it's not just shared online, it's circulated to all members, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've got that noted down, most possibly into the cost, Gwen. But yes, yes, I've got that noted down. Yeah, definitely.
It also mentions on page 9 something about communication, doesn't it? And basically improving our communication with the public about what they receive for their council tax. That was picked up by COSC as well. But it's of paramount importance now that we communicate with the public about their priorities and what they receive for their council tax contribution. Councillor Williams first.
Yeah, I noted in the report as well that it did discuss the contacts into the civic offices as well. So I wondered if we could have some information on KPIs with calls answered and that, because that is picked up in there, and the how outside interact with the inside, and how you know, responsive we are, as well as also how we share our information, because we discussed about sharing information, and that was what my concern was, is I don't think we're hitting all the areas. Online doesn't cover the elderly population, and so we need to look at how we best deliver. Having just been on 3 courses of data training, and yesterday's was about the sharing of information and the gathering of information. From what I learned yesterday, I don't think we're quite doing that here yet. Thank you.
Yeah.
So can I just clarify, Councillor, is that something that you would want to recommend it, that as the local authority look at this, or is this something you want to look at for the committee in the future on a forward work programme?
I think we can ask for this in the recommendations if there are KPIs to do with the calls answered, and how how accessible we are, as well as we also said we'd look at for the recommendations how we share that information with individuals too.
Yeah, this may be more applicable to the corporate plan, don't you think, in the service user experience and the communicating with people, and how, you know, we collect data about, you know, service users' experience, I suppose, rather than necessarily the MTFS in the budget. But we do reflect the fact that we do need to communicate better, don't we, with the public about some of the budget pressures which we have and how they impact upon service delivery. So yeah, plus we can reflect that in either the corporate plan recommendations or these particular ones. Okay, over to you again, Rachel.
Thank you. I think that's everything I've got there. COSC then, obviously, you know, there was discussion around the BREP review. Was there any other extra information in terms of that? I've noted down the extra comments. Well, Meryl actually noted them down for that. So points included: start the process earlier, share the budget book with all members earlier. That's where I had it. I knew Meryl had it somewhere. Have a framework for continuous process through the year, more timely responses to requests for information from BREP, feedback from broader conversation with residents, non-consultation. So I've got that noted down. Was there anything else in terms of the BREP review? As I said, I'm not sure when WLGA will be able to come in. I'm in contact with them shortly to discuss it. But then hopefully we'll get some work sorted with them and they can look at that with us. But was there anything else in terms from COSC or on any of the other recommendations, please?
From COSC now? Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, yes, I think is the answer. First of all, regarding national legislative changes and funding, to ensure that we write to both the Welsh Government and the UK Government to note that the 3% uplift in funding doesn't allow us to, first of all, roll out their national legislative commitments, which they've made, but we have to implement them, while also implementing our core services, or delivering our core services, rather. Also, I think we requested the possibility, although this is unlikely to change unless His Majesty's Treasury gives us a multi-year budget settlement, but it's still worth lobbying for, so that it provides stability of budgets. And as Councillor Retzo's committee mentioned, especially with regards to social services, the instability of the short-term reliance on grant funding has an impact on certain services which needs to be addressed by central government. So in short, we mustn't allow national policy commitments to override our core services, and that they should be fully funded over a multi-year funding settlement. Also, I picked up on, and this goes across all committees, staffing reductions in the back office functions and the impact on service delivery. So we mentioned, for example, this is just an example, but it runs across the whole of the local authority when we're looking at organisational transformation. It can heap pressure on other organisations. So, for example, if you reduce legal support, HR support, procurement support, all of the different service level agreements, then it's going to have an impact on schools, perhaps, and their budgets. So I think what we need to do is reflect the interconnectivity of different budget reductions, and that they need to be seen in the round rather than just in their own individual silos. So I think the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee mentioned that we wanted to see, and this is has been acknowledged by the Chief Executive as a longer-term piece of work, but that we should do a corporate qualitative impact assessment and an operational risk register of what these changes will mean to operational service delivery, and that goes that is in conjunction with the financial and governance audit issues which are already looked at by Governance and Audit Committee. So I hope that's been captured.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify on that? Because the recommendation there is already about a qualitative impact assessment, was it just additional ones that in terms of additional recommendation there or not?
So what I'm suggesting is that all of those back office functions, that we have a qualitative impact assessment on what it will mean for frontline service delivery. So it'll be a longer term piece of work. It's not necessarily going to manifest itself for this particular budget round, but it's something which we need to bear in mind going forward in advance of consideration of next year's budget. You know, especially with in relation to the Chief Executive's Directorate.
So I could strengthen. Sorry, I could strengthen number 5 then and ask that, and amend that one to recommend that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
If the committee are content with that, yeah. Councillor Blesser.
Thank you. I just wanted to put forward a recommendation or mention the fact that we've been talking about working in silos, etc. And I did bring up the fact that there's a lot of innovative working that's happening within the Social Services Directorate that doesn't seem to be channeling across to the other directorates. And I just wondered if, in the same way that we do partnership working with third parties externally, if there's a way to get them together as directorates to discuss innovative working going forward, because obviously we can't continue to cut budgets. That's not sustainable. So we have to look at new, innovative, fresh ideas and see if we can share those ideas across the directorates that are coming out of one particular one. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, that fits in very well with the organisational and transformational change, alternative ways of working, which fits in quite well with our qualitative impact assessment and a general corporate strategy, I guess, of how we deliver core public services with less. So yeah, thank you for that. Did we reflect corporate risk at all, Rachel? I'm conscious of the fact that Councillor Griffiths and Councillor Jones, who's had to leave us now, recommended that we had a corporate risk register because of the number of red, undeliverable or highly unlikely to be delivered budget reduction proposals within this particular MTFS. There is already a corporate risk register, because I think the reason why is because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the original Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, Councillor Griffiths felt extremely uncomfortable that it wasn't a budget that we could actually achieve in practice. So while Caris, as the Section 151 officer, has a duty to set a numerically balanced and robust budget, in theory, there's a question here about whether the number of red indicators means that it's going to be a robust and balanced budget in practice. Now, I'm sceptical that would be the case given the number of reds. If it is going to be achievable, then recategorise them as ambers if necessary. We need to be a little bit more ambitious in the way in which we deploy some of these budget reduction proposals. Otherwise, they may not be achievable at all. And we'll be in the situation like we were this year in having to revise the budget, having variaments or revisions mid-year, and therefore, in practice, it's not a balanced and robust budget, is it? Councillor Williams?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add to that, and that's where my concerns are with regards to education cuts and simply saying, well, we've pushed those out of BCBC now. They're on the heads of the head teachers. The schools get that now. So we're going from red to green, which we've shown this year, even though we're in deficit and we've wiped out over the 12 months, 12 million of reserves and are in a deficit. So I'm still of that opinion that that money has to go somewhere. And if these schools are not going to be able to do the deficit recovery, and I've sat down and I've had my meetings as a chair of governors, and I don't know where this money is going to come from for this deficit recovery plan that we've agreed, and that's on this year's, without a 5% cut on top of that. With a 5% cut, I know my school is only going to be, the funding we get in will simply cover 100% of staff costs, nothing else. We can provide nothing else there. And if that's our school, that's going to be the same across the board, because we were lucky we went into this not in a deficit last year. And now this is the position we're in, whereas other schools would have already still been in a deficit last year. So that money could still potentially come back here. So I can't see how they can say a red and then, oh yes, we've transferred it all out to the schools now. It's off our books, but the money's still owed somewhere, and that's a green.
Yeah, it's, as you say, it's like shifting papers around, really. Basically, it's not our problem, Governor, anymore. It's down to the schools. But then, when they fail in making their deficit recovery plans in 3 years' time, it comes back to the local authority. So, you know, we can note that, I guess, under the Education and Family Support Directorate when we come to it.
I can, if you want, Chair, I can put this all as one big comment in terms of the reds, in terms of the risk. And I mean, unless you want to make a recommendation on it, it would be a general comment then on the budget as a whole.
Yeah, that's fine. The only other thing, we mentioned communications already, and the Chief Executive acknowledged that we needed a broader conversation generally on the public's priorities. The other thing is the capital programme. So Councillor Griffiths once again mentioned that we should be examining the capital programme, because if a quarter, for example, of the reds don't come to fruition, cabinets will have to delay capital spend. So that's going to have to come before scrutiny at some point. I think there is a commitment that it will come before scrutiny after it comes to council. So that'll have to go on our forward work programme going forward. But it'll be a crucial element to discuss as part of the next year's budget. And I think Councillor Griffiths mentioned that he wanted it considered by whatever replaces BREP next year. So that is that. There was a discussion as well over the council tax levels. The Cabinet will have to consider whether they use any surplus money which comes from teacher pay and pensions, if it does finally arrive from central government, on whether they want to choose to mitigate some of the reductions in service budgets, or whether they choose to reduce that. I'm not sure whether committee have come to a conclusion of whether they would prefer it to be a mixed approach, or whether they would like specific priorities. Does anyone have any overriding thoughts about that? Because this is the time now to present them to Cabinet. Councillor Williams?
I've got to stick to my original with education, and I was sat, for those who weren't on the education committee, what we heard from head teachers is it's frightening what's going to happen if they're hit with that 5% all in one go. A 2% cut is not going to be achievable for a lot of schools, but it's more palatable, and they can be more compliant with the financial scheme for schools, because you've got a 3-year deficit recovery plan, or you could extend it to a 5-year. But when you've got 5% at the outset on top of a 2%, that's a 7% cut over 2 years. That is very difficult to manage over even a 5-year deficit recovery plan. Having worked our way out of one in the past with one of the schools I'm a governor at, I know how difficult it is over 5 years. So I think to allow a reduced 2%, as we showed, splitting it out across, will hopefully allow that to be more achievable, so that we're not required to have officers rewrite our financial scheme for schools. We can manage with that, because there's a whole lot of work otherwise without that. And I think it will impact on other directorates as well, with social services, for example, are going to be hit. And when we had the NHS into one of our previous committees, they said any further cuts to education would be disastrous on the health service too, and what they have to pick up with regards to children. Thank you.
So yeah, we're moving on to obviously the education budget now. I've just got another couple of comments on the general, but perhaps just picking up on what Councillor Williams said then. Is everyone content that we put forward Scrutiny Committee 1's recommendation that there's a shallower cut to education, and there's a 2% cut year on year over the course of the MTFS, still making that overall 8% required cut in spending, but allowing it to be more sustainable. Because the head teachers that came before Scrutiny Committee 1 said that it was totally unsustainable, that it was that all head teachers were in despair. They described it as horrific, and they wouldn't be able to exercise their duties for the children of the county borough. So I don't think, as chair of that committee and chair of this, that we can ignore professional advice like that, and that we ought to provide that as one of our principal recommendations if members are in agreement. But please do say if there's any dissent.
I'll just come in then.
Yeah.
That's okay, Chair. Just to kind of give the you as the overview committee the kind of overview in terms of this extra funding then. So in relation to, I've managed to summarise in a way all the kind of proposals relating to that have come forward. So for example, SOC 1 was proposing to pull some of that funding from the, if it's received, the UK funding for, as the chair said, for the school, to reduce the school budgets. There was also a pull from it of 120k taken for street cleaning from SOC 3. And there was also a proposal of 65,000 then from social services to pull on that for two proposals that they didn't want to go through. So this, as I said, needs to be seen in context where it's either these go forward or there's a reduction in council tax. So as I said, this is the decisions in terms of, the recommendations in terms of the cost to put forward to strengthen and to put forward which ones they would like to. They all go forward, I should say, and all the recommendations go forward as is, but it's for you to make final comments on which ones you see in terms of if we do get this reduced, this extra funding, those are the ones you'd like to prioritise. And may I note that, it's also the realisation that if we don't get the funding, those cuts will have to go through, because there isn't any other proposal going forward as such.
Yeah, Richard, Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, look, I'm not opposed to that, but we have to look at the council tax as well. Housing associations have just put their rent up, right, which is a lot of money, £80 a month that's gone up by, right? So they can have an AMRIN with 9.5% on top as well from BCBC. I don't know how single people or retired people are going to afford that. So I think we need to look at a holistic approach here and perhaps give some to education and give some to the council tax, just to bring it down a little bit, So I don't know.
I think the leader expressed in our original cost meeting that he was willing to look at a mixed approach, both protecting frontline service delivery and reducing council tax. I guess that's a matter for Cabinet. Whether we receive the central government funding or not is out of our control, really. Even though we can lobby for it, it's potentially too late during this budget round. Just on the point about schools' delegated budgets, Rachel, I think we recommended that not only we would use part or all of the funding from the teachers' pay and pensions, but we would also look to postpone or delay some of the budget pressures of 11.856 million, I think it was.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So it was part from one and part from the other. But as I said, I just don't know whether you had any views in terms of what percentage of maybe the 3 million for council tax and what percentage maybe for school budgets and the other pulls on it as well from the other committees.
I think it would depend on how much would it be to bring that figure down to that 2% where we've, concluded that it's sustainable. We've received professionals' view that it could be sustainable if it were 2% year on year, so that they are allowed to plan. I don't know what figure that brings us down to. What does £3.2 million look like? I can't do the maths in my head. Was it £5.7 million? Is it roughly for schools' delegated budget decrease? What would it be if it was 2%? I'm not very good at maths, sorry. Does anyone have the school's delegated budgets in front of them? There we are, 5.735 million. That's 5%. So what is 2.28 million.
You need to find
No,
5.7.
don't think so. No, it's 1% is 1.2 million, is it?
You need to find an extra round about 3 to 3.5.
Yeah, so almost all of it would be swallowed up by that. So therefore, other efficiency savings would have to be found from elsewhere. Now, some of the proposals, for example, and we'll get to it later on, otherwise we'll end up flying around everywhere. But for example, the Bridgend town bus station, it may be the case that that's offset by income generation opportunities as well. So Cabinet would have to consider that. Well, but it's going through over the course of the MTFS, isn't it? Yeah. And that is something which we also have to consider. But that was just an example. Yeah. So, you know, going back to the original discussion from COSC, there were other items whereby we wanted to do a cost-benefit analysis of those, and I know Cabinet hate me for saying this, but those areas whereby we are statutorily obliged to provide services and where we're providing above and beyond discretionary services. So let's do a cost-benefit analysis. Where do they play a preventative role in ensuring that people don't have to enter into statutory intervention, or where is it just a nice to have? I don't expect there are many nice to haves anymore. I expect they're all playing a role in preventing people from accessing that statutory intervention. But let's have the proof. Let's have the evidence before us so we can make accurate and evidence-based decisions. And then we did say that we would look at every single possible opportunity to maximise income generation from sharing services with other partners, third sector partners, other local authorities, and proactively offering the authority services where there's potential for income to be generated to mitigate some of the future budget reductions. And we talked about cost recovery. I know that was picked up at Scrutiny Committee 3 in terms of green waste and bulky waste collection, as well as ensuring that we don't subsidise berthing boats at Porthcawl Marina. I think that was it for COSC, Rachel. Sorry, Amanda, Councillor Williams.
I was just going to seek clarity because it was mentioned that there's a potential that we'll have another million as well coming in, wasn't there?
There's a potential,
so
yeah.
Not just, yeah. So obviously that would, if that came in as well, that would be something that would be potentially, but again, that depends on when it's due in, because I believe the council tax cannot be amended afterwards, can it? So we can amend others, but we cannot amend. So we need to look at council tax as well before the budget's agreed, because 9.5% to most families means a difference between whether they can put a meal on the table or not. So we need to be looking at that as well. Thank you.
I think every 1% on council tax, though, isn't it something like £800,000? So there's very little wiggle room, isn't there, when you look at the budget in the round. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back on that one. The extra £1 million will probably come with strings attached and an expectation that that be spent on social services, but still important to note.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hughes.
Sorry, if I may, Chair. I think this is the point. I do need to get kind of some type of a view on council tax in terms of that against the other ones. I mean, whether that's all I'm just pushing for at the moment. I know it's a difficult one, but I think it's a view on the council tax proposal, because there is a recommendation from BREF on that. So I think in terms of where the challenge will come back at you in terms of the responses to your recommendations is they can't possibly look at taking all of this from the 3 million. And I know there's other proposals, as you said, Chair. They're also looking at the, I think if it was aside from council tax, it looks viable in terms of taking that if that additional funding was coming forward. But in terms of if there's a proposal for reducing council tax as well, there will be the challenge coming back of we can't do all of it. So in terms of the principal ones, the Chair put a proposal forward in terms of prioritising the education one. Is there consensus for that? Is there a consensus to prioritise the council tax? I'm just trying to get the feel of the committee, please.
The issue I have with the education budget is the knock-on effect on so many different areas. I just cannot ignore what the professionals told us in that the impact on our social services and early help and all of the different ramifications across the whole local authority, including the burden which they're going to be under as a result of the decrease in HR support, procurement support. It's just something which I think we should prioritise. But obviously, I'm just one member of this committee, and I'm not in an executive leadership role as a member of the cabinet either, so I can't make decisions on this. I would have preferred an approach whereby we try and protect frontline service delivery, but I'm not ignorant to the fact that a 9.5% increase in council tax will be a significant burden on some of the most deprived people in our county, which are already suffering from a cost of living crisis. So there are no easy decisions here, are there? Councillor Granville?
But just to say, Chair, just to give a quick flavour of things out there. My father's a long time retired, but there are two rates. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are two rates when you retire. A rate when you retired early, like my father did, and now they changed the rate to what I would have retired on. And there's a big difference. So people that are retired for a long time, like 20 years, are going to be harder hit again because they're having peanuts. So I think, and I would formally move, Chair, that we do look at reducing the council tax and let the Cabinet make a decision, and it'll be down to full council to vote on it.
We can certainly ask them to look at both the education budget and council tax level as priorities, as a mixed approach. There's clearly going to be a difference of opinion among every single member of what proportion of it should be apportioned to which. It depends which committee you sit on, I guess, about what recommendations and proposals have come forward. But those are the key ones, aren't they? The elephants in the room are the education budget and the council tax levels. Just moving on to nursery provision, while it was regrettable, this is another significant budget heading of 2.15 million. There was regret from the head teachers, and that it could have some of the some devastating effects, in fact, on some of the most deprived communities in our county. However, they said that because it was in addition to what was statutorily obliged to do, that regrettably it had to be considered. So I think we ought to just say, well, that budget reduction proposal has to proceed. If we're going to protect the school's delegated budgets, we cannot protect everything. So it's with regret that will have to be taken back to the statutory provision, unless other members have thoughts.
It's been mentioned here today, austerity. It's been 13 years. We're now cutting into the bone. Where do you make the cuts? We have to be strategic as a council. What we're going to do? Either we're going to go down the education or whatever. You have to make them recommendations and just move forward with it. It's unfortunate nursery is part of it. We can't cover everything, unfortunately, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Granville. The head teachers mentioned to try and action merging of schools as urgently as possible. We can try and ask the Cabinet to front load those decisions if possible, although it'll be subject to consultation, I assume. There was a recommendation on additional learning needs, wasn't there, because of the ramifications of that. There's concern generally, I think this could be a general comment as well, can Cabinet look at all of the budget reductions which have a narrative whereby they say the council may not be able to exercise its statutory duties?
I think I've got that one.
You've got that one already, Rachel, yeah? Okay, good. There was a recommendation from Scrutiny Committee 1 that EFS 13 and 14 be removed. That's relating to additional learning needs, I believe. And we asked for details, didn't we, about the £500,000 growth proposed under EFS 4, and Lindsay said that was relating to early help rather than ALN, but obviously they're inextricably linked. It's going back to this point about what the head teacher said, and what we've been rehearsing throughout today's meeting is the interconnectivity of all of these different proposals. Richard, is that a legacy hand or no? Okay. Councillor Williams?
But I think that needs clarifying, because if I recall when we had our SOC 1 meeting, there was a budget line cut for early help somewhere else in the papers. So I think we need to clarify exactly where that 500,000 is going and where early help is going to sit in that. Because I know the council leader at the time said, well, there's a 300 and odd £1,000 investment into early help, but that's 500,000. But there was a cut elsewhere on one of the budget lines, so I think we need to clarify.
Yeah, it was on EDFS 27. It's a review of staffing structures within early help. It was £132,000, I believe, and it said it could result in an increase in referrals to statutory services and CAMS. I think that was it.
Yeah, but the answer, I think it was Councillor Ian Spiller who asked the question. The answer given was, but there's 300 and odd thousand being injected into early help. But that figure we've got there is 500,000. So there is some disparity between those two figures there as well.
I think it was put down to get clarification.
Yeah, so I think we need to clarify, and we need to clarify exactly where early help will be sitting as well, because there was also mention in that meeting that potentially that money was going towards social services to cover early help. So does that mean early help is moving there, or I'd like some clarity on that.
Okay, we'll get clarity on that. There was also a recommendation that EFS 13 and 14 be removed from the budget reduction proposals and then ring-fenced against future reductions. That is just for members' reference relating to additional learning needs, I believe. EDFS 13, yeah, ALN statutory team reduction of staffing structure, that's 17,000. And early years ALN, that was what Councillor Spiller raised, I believe, the 67,000 that could be taken perhaps from the budget growth in that 500,000, whether that was possible. I think that was it, wasn't it? So we'll get clarity on that. Okay, moving forward, home to school transport, we've already given that an airing. That's on our forward work programme for Scrutiny Committee 1, and I can't see any other way in which we're going to meet the budget reduction, or a balanced budget rather, without some of these changes. So the committee could support a review anyway into it. Committee 2, then I think, Rachel, is it? Yeah. Committee 2, this is Councillor Bledsow's committee, so happy to defer to you, Councillor Bledsow, if you want me to. I think you mentioned that generally there are a lot of areas within this particular directorate where they're reviewing items, and I think we questioned the deliverability of quite a lot of them, given the budget pressures within the directorate. Also, Care Inspectorate Wales have said, as I mentioned, we require continued corporate support for children's social care. So do you have any general comments on what you'd like to put forward as a committee for our final recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. I think the recommendations really should be that the cost of increasing care is going to be a danger flashpoint, and that really does need looking at and reviewing and considering carefully, because that's going to push back to the directorate more cost pressures and implications long term. So we need to look at that, and also as well about the care experienced children and the cost to the budget and the pressures there of trying to bring those costs in-house here in county rather than out of county, because that is a massive pressure on the budget. So I think that needs careful consideration and reviewing as well as linking the first one with the increased cost to the adults with learning disabilities. Yeah. And the increased cost to the home care there. Those both need, all three of those areas really need looking at, and I think those would be the recommendations from SOC 2. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, we mentioned, didn't we, that meeting our statutory duties in this area requires significant investment rather than withdrawal of funding. So I mentioned, was it wise to withdraw funding from this particular directorate, given the significant pressures which we've seen in this financial year, where we've had to via £8 million worth of money, and we're still £12 million overspent in that directorate. That's notwithstanding that, we don't receive any capital funding to develop our own services and housing to place children in counties. So that may be something which has to be looked at as well. Is that all from you, Councillor Betso? Yeah.
It is, and perhaps as well, the Cabinet member could raise that final issue that you've just brought there, because I know she's back and forth to the Senedd on quite a regular basis. I think she might be a Senedd member by this point, but no, it might be something for her to raise there as well, because it's an important point. Thank you.
Okay. Scrutiny Committee 3 then, the recommendations from there was, we've already mentioned income generation and full cost recovery. We looked at potentially working with others and learning from best practice. I think you mentioned street works and learning from Carmarthen County Council. Councillor Williams, I believe, said that. And of course, whilst acknowledging that the proposed closure of Bridgend Bus Station isn't within next year's budget savings, Scrutiny Committee 3 expressed strong concerns about this, and a number of recommendations should go forward from this committee for future budget years and the MTFS, which includes potential efficiency savings from energy and potential commercial income generation as well, to protect the bus station for the future. Yeah, sure.
In terms of, as I said, the recommendations that are already there and going forward, as I said, there was an expression, a concern in terms of the impact on the communities director as a whole and how it will function with further budget cuts going forward, and that they had been cut disproportionately over the years in relation to any of the directorate. I just wonder whether the members wanted to make any final recommendation on that from this committee, please.
Happy to take members' views. From my perspective, I just can't see a way of shielding the Communities Directorate from any cuts due to the extreme situation which we find ourselves in social services and education. However, we need to look at an alternative business model for the Communities Directorate in doing what our colleagues on Scrutiny Committee 3 have rightly identified, and that is to ensure that we have full cost recovery for our services. We don't subsidise some of the areas which we are currently subsidising, and we look at commercial income generation at all of our strategic locations within the county borough, so that we can do as much as we possibly can to offset some of the costs which the Communities Directorate face, so that they can plough most of their money into areas which are considered most by the public as important and associated with their council tax. So most people associate their council tax with waste collection and highways. You know, perhaps most of our money should be concentrated on that rather than subsidising areas where we don't have to subsidise, and whereby we can try and offset some of the costs by exploring commercial income generation. So that's the only thing that I can suggest, which is going to shield some of the areas in the Communities Directorate from major cuts. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, and also with that, I think it's to bring the public with us so that they have faith in us, so that when there is things like littering and fly tipping, that those are taken seriously. That gives the public faith in what we're doing. And I'm concerned that whilst we cannot protect the budget here, and it's unfortunate, and I'm concerned about a small number of staff having to do an awful lot more, particularly where this is where all of the referrals come into. Without anyone to do the referrals, they haven't got a dedicated officer for referrals. It's going to increase the number of referrals because of the complaints. So we have to make sure that the services we do provide fill out the public with confidence, which is why I've raised in the past about the fly tipping and the street works penalties, because last week throughout the borough there was traffic chaos because we weren't doing it. Was ironic that I'd raised it in a meeting and then we had 3 non-compliant street works that caused gridlock in the borough. And yet if we were doing all of that, and when we look at our structures, I found there were on the internal directory there were 5 highways inspectors, stroke streetworks inspectors and things. You know, so we're not looking at employing additional staff. It's looking at what we can do to bring in, whilst we can't make money off these fines, they are there to cover costs. So if it covers the cost of one of those members of staff we've already got employed in the local authority, that's a saving to us. And it also gives the public reassurance that we are there and working on their behalf. It'll tidy up the county if we're penalising for fly tipping and throwing litter everywhere. And generally, the place will look a lot better. So I think we need to push down those lines as well.
Great, thanks very much, Councillor Williams. We've got that. Just a couple more things from me, and then I'm done. I think Scrutiny Committee 3 referred to potentially boxing a bit cleverer and taking on multi-skilled teams of staff to deal with grass cutting, street cleaning, and covering a wider remit to try and upskill some of our staff to cover more roles. The committee proposed that the Directorate look at what neighbouring local authorities do to learn from best practice in this area, and maybe even look at sharing services with some of our partners in a more collaborative way. Finally, another proposal which will alarm the public if it were to go ahead, and that's the proposal to close community recycling centres for an additional day per week on the weekend. There was concern from Scrutiny Committee 3 about a potential increase in fly tipping, and they said that £60,000 could be moved forward with the proposals to commercially let the Pandy Depot. This could be brought forward into 2024-25 savings. They also said that if further savings were required, we could look at reducing the opening hours of the centres, closing for a second additional day during the week rather than the weekend, and potentially looking at other local authorities at what they do, such as working smarter, introduction of appointments to reduce queues, and that this method seemed to work effectively in other local authorities. Apart from that, I'm done. What about anyone else? Does anyone have anything else they'd like to raise? No? Rachel, did you have anything else that you captured?
Nope, I didn't on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, if everyone's in agreement, those recommendations can go forward as has been described. I'm sure Rachel will circulate them to me and to other members before they go out to Cabinet. Would that be possible to just cast an eye over it?
I will, for information, I will, but members will have to rely on the Chair in this instance because the send out is actually tomorrow.
There we are, have to rely on me. Lucky you.
We have to draft these up.
You can blame me then if I didn't reflect your remarks accurately. Okay, thank you very much, Rachel, for that and all your hard work today, along with your team. Unless there's anything else, we move to item 8, and that's urgent items. There are no urgent items of business in...
Sorry, Chair, we have to go through the quarter 3 and the capital strategy conclusions.
Oh. Sorry.
The other 2 items. Conclusions. I can whiz through those quickly.
Or do you want to carry on? I don't mind with me because I've had something treatment. Do you want to carry on?
I thought, sorry, Rachel, I thought we just had to note those reports.
Well, there's comments and...
Oh, apologies, okay.
I picked up...
That's why I was moving on to item 8, because I thought we just had to note. It's fine. Sorry about that.
I can whiz through really quickly. I've got many requests for information in terms of that. So I've got in terms of the contingency reserve, provide the figure after. I've got Janine clarifying of the blue badge scheme. I've got out authority placements. Are any children accessed in Heronsbridge, and that information that Councillor Bletzer requested in terms of the exact figures. I've got the definitions being provided, going forward to clarify on the numbers fluctuating for Heronsbridge. I've also got the clarification of the overspend for fleet services. And the only thing I've got highlighted as a potential recommendation is review the council tax reduction scheme to make sure it's not too rigid. I think that was again coming from Councillor Blett, so that was the request there. Oh, and a further request information, which was to check the deficit, why the same for quarter 2 and quarter 3, which Lindsay said he'd come back on. And I think Councillor Amanda Williams has one as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I was too keen to go. Councillor Williams, please.
Yeah, so I had the one which was the deficit figures, but the other one was with regards to the financial scheme for schools, and I'd like the recommendation that we review our funding to schools, because at the moment we've got 3,000 difference in some schools, and it hasn't been looked at for a long time, so I'd like to recommend that.
Raised, Councillor Williams, in the actual budget recommendations. It's under SOC 1. It was definitely one of the recommendations that I concluded from the meeting, which I supported, and it was to look at the funding formula. Bear with me, I will find it in 2 seconds. Funding formula. Yeah, so number 4 from SOC 1. Whilst appreciating the proposals to the change of the school funding formula can be raised and discussed at the school budget forum, the committee recommended that a full review of the financial scheme and funding formula for schools be undertaken with full involvement of both primary and secondary school governing bodies. Everyone happy with that?
Okay, everyone content with the budget outturn for quarter 3? And now we go to the capital strategy then, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, I've got some requests for information, or requests rather, to include some various information into the capital strategy. So it was adding a line to the strategy to address future scheme costs, potential risks. I'm trying to interpret my writing, if I may. Potential risks and money that we may have to find. That was it. That was what Caris agreed to, that going forward, that we may have to find in the future. There was a potential recommendation that the members may wish to make in terms of adding additional principle in there, that the impact of the revenue budget might have on in the future on the capital programme. If members are happy with that one. Again, in terms of the impact of the Porthcawl Harbour and asset, whether you wish to make that as a recommendation to look at Porthcawl Harbour, possibly run it as a private rather than the council run it.
I think the leader said he was willing to look at it, didn't he? So. And
then additional information then provide a date back to, the date in terms of the investment, the 5.854 million that Councillor Tim Thomas mentioned, and to provide a date on that. I've got that for further information. And then a potential recommendation about a review of, I think there was this Councillor Martin Hughes asked for a review of the board, the capital programme board be added to the strategy for the future. I think I've got 2 final things for further information. Clarify the fee in terms of a later date when known for the budget. This was in relation to the contractors. When looking at budget pressures for revenue costs to build schools and everything, they said it's 25 years, but they said they would clarify the fee. And then also there was a concern in terms of the impact on communities. And again, I can't actually read my writing on this part, but I will clarify with the chair on that when I will revisit the recording and come back on that piece of further information. Thank you.
Oh, I don't blame you, Rachel. After what's been such a long meeting, we can't remember everything we've said now, can we? So we'll review it and we'll make sure that everything's accurate in readiness for sending on to Cabinet. I think I can start my phrase again now, and we move to item 8, and that's urgent items. There are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules, and I'd like to thank all members and invitees for their contributions today, and after 6 hours, I close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.